Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
Guildford Shakespeare Company began with an outdoor production of Much Ado About Nothing in Guildford Castle Grounds in 2006. 18 years on, after performing in many different indoor and outdoor locations around Guildford, including last year a Boeing 747, the company is celebrating its coming of age with a production of Romeo and Juliet, which ends up in the Castle Grounds, but mostly takes place at various locations along Guildford High Street. I spoke to the company's founders, Pinches and Sarah Gobran, about the production and about the challenges, practical and financial, of mounting their style of theatre in spaces that were not designed for performance. But first, I asked them what it felt like to be 18.
Well, we can have a drink at last.
Yes, we can. I wish we looked like we were 18. Actually, no, I don't. I think it's extraordinary and it's surprising, you know, when you spend your time building, developing, loving your company and the people that join it and help create it and are part of it, you don't really notice the time going. So to think that it's 18 years, it fills me with pride and a slightly sicky, am I really that old? If I'm honest.
I think as well, you know, it is a surprise in the sense that 18 years ago, I think I can say for both of us, neither of us thought that we'd be sat here doing a podcast about our 18th birthday. You know, when we set this up, you know, the journey that GSC has been on over the last 18 years is really, well, for us, really extraordinary in terms of us. We didn't plan any of it, and it has, as we've met people or people have met us, and as we've seen a need for something or a gap in the market for something, and as we've learned and developed. But maybe Sarah, you should say about why we set up.
So we were both jobbing actors at the time. I was touring with Peter Pan, and you were about to tour for Forest Fords, weren't you? And I was auditioning for my next job, which happened to be open air theatre work, and a company who don't exist anymore, called Sprite, where it was their first year, and they were about the same age as Matt and I, and they had just set up. They were doing their first show of Midsummer Night's Dream to be outside Ripley Castle. And as I was auditioning for them, I was thinking, God, these people are amazing for, you know, getting on and doing their own thing, but also, what a glorious thing to have, you know, open air Shakespeare in the Castle Grounds. Guildford's got a castle. And then I was thinking, you know, this happens in Oxford, it happens in Cambridge, obviously in London. And the more I thought about it, and I just thought it's perfect for Guildford, you know, picnicking and Shakespeare and outside castles, how lovely. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, if someone else does this, I'm going to be absolutely furious. That was my main motivator, fury. So I said to Matt, I'm going to put on a Shakespeare play in the Castle Grounds. Do you want to do it with me? And Matt was a bit like, oh, maybe. I tell you what, I'll help you and we can just, you know, for the first year for once. And anyway, we're both on this podcast 18 years later. So
there we go. But it has, I mean, don't get me wrong. Anybody who works in this industry will know that it's hard work. I mean, that's kind of, you know, it's almost de facto, but it's also been a real joy to discover so many wonderful things. What joy, the discovery of so much to do with this industry, with this, with the profession, with Shakespeare. That's probably something else to talk about, but also to have the privilege of working with hundreds, probably thousands by now, of talented, wonderful artists. That's, you know, on stage, backstage, but also, you know, volunteer stewards, and then the range of places that we have had the fortune of performing in, whether, like Sarah says at the beginning, the Castle Gardens here in Guildford, but, you know, to the point where at Christmas in 23 last year, we did a murder mystery on a Boeing 747. We've been invited to do a show on the Queen Mary 2 on Cunard.
Model railway. Stage on a mini train.
So that breadth of where theatre can go, where theatre can take people, I think has been a real joy. And what that also sort of barrels into and has enabled us to do is to expand the purpose of theatre, the reason why theatre exists. And that's not just, and it is great entertainment. That absolutely is paramount part of it. But also theatre has the power to change lives and to change people's perceptions. And that doesn't have to be necessary. It can be in a theatre show, but it can also be through the huge amount of outreach and educational work that the theatre company now engages with, which I would never have thought that we would, envisioned doing.
No, well, 24,000 participation spaces were created just last year alone, and it's a huge amount, isn't it? And I think it's something like 18,000 of those were free to access. So that we do projects for young carers. We have a family mental health drama therapy project. We take young people perhaps on pupil premiums into elderly care homes, and they put on plays together. We tour to schools, and have our Saturday clubs or Wednesday night clubs, our clubs for children with disabilities, a specific club for autistic children. So it's a huge range, isn't it? And through all of that, yes, in terms of the creatives and the staff and the facilitators and the actors, you meet incredible people who care so much about the power of theatre and the power of drama and how transformative it can be to people's lives. In some cases, we found truly life-saving, people who have really been not in good places, but by coming into a community and working with people through drama and finding their place, it has changed their lives. But also all of those individuals that are taking part in the programs, the community in which we work. There are so many glorious human beings living different lives. And so the stories that we tell include all of those people. That is our world, I guess, and our community. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, Matt, I read on your website that you actually started, your first job was outdoors here in Manchester as D'Artagnan, wasn't it?
It was. My very first job as an actor was open air theatre in the Parsonage Gardens in Didsbury, Manchester, playing D'Artagnan in Three Musketeers. And I just graduated that July from Bretton Hall over just across the Pennines there. And sadly, Bretton Hall no longer exists.
No.
But yeah, and it was a wonderful, and that journey, from that point of view, I thought I was going to be, I didn't know what I was going to do with my career. And I got an agent off the back of that show. And then I worked for Action Transport Theatre over in Ellesmere Port for sort of 8 months and lived over there. Then I lived in Manchester and did my first panto was in Manchester for the library at the Wythenshawe Forum. And then all my other jobs were like out of a suitcase. So I wasn't actually living in Manchester. So then I moved down to London, and then that was when I met Sarah. We were doing a play at the Seacon Theatre in Sutton, and it went. And it sort of went from there. So yes, Manchester was the start of it.
Yeah, and Bretton Hall's no longer in existence, and neither is Wythenshawe Forum. That's long gone as well. All the library theatre.
Oh no, really?
Yes.
Oh, what a shame! What an amazing building that was, though.
Yeah.
What a resource.
Theatre in the middle of a shopping centre, wasn't it?
Yes, incredible. This big estate. Whoever had the original forethought of planning, brilliant. But sadly, I guess cuts and things have done away with it.
But I was reading Sheila's review of your first, I think it was your last Romeo and Juliet back in 2010. And that seemed to be quite a significant year, because she mentioned in her review that there was a February production. She said you'd come indoors for the first time. It was your first tragedy, and it was with a view to becoming a year-round company. So that sounds like quite a few changes in 1 year.
Yes, it was a big and interesting first step. So in 2008, we put in our summer program that we were looking to extend our reach to starting to do a show in February. And we were interested in buildings that might be available, interesting buildings that might be available. Because one of the things, as we started to, you get to a point where you go, with the summer shows, they get more popular, they're doing well. But if you're only doing that once a year, is it a really time-consuming hobby, or do you take the leap? By then, we were already doing education classes. Do you take the leap and try to do the next thing and make it a business, which was what we decided to do. But of course, part of that conversation was, well, if we're an open air theatre company and we take things indoors, what is that? Is that a conventional theatre? That doesn't seem quite in keeping with the open air thing. So that's when our USP really properly started in terms of being site responsive.
Yeah, and it was also, 2010 was a big year, because also by the end of that year, so Romeo and Juliet, that first Romeo and Juliet, which was in the February, by the December, we had become a registered charity, which again also completely changed and revolutionized the theatre company in terms of, having specific objectives and the board that we could bring on expertise, and lean upon. So 2010 was a really big year, but wonderfully as well, doing Romeo and Juliet. We later did it again in that very same venue 8 years later, and it's Surrey's largest Georgian church. And so we were able to tap in, like Sarah says, into that site responsive element of our work and go, well, hang on, if we're in a Georgian church for our first time in there, we looked, Romeo and Juliet, well, let's set it in that period. And again, it worked with the themes of that within the play, but also it just, I think one of the biggest, many things, but things that people said to us afterwards was how they had lived all their life in this town, but had never set foot inside that church. Or they didn't realize that it was so big inside, or they didn't realize that one of their relatives is on a war plaque, a commemorative war plaque and stuff like that. And that's where, going back to what Sarah's saying about the power that theatre has, or art in general, how it can bring communities not together, but it does, but in that sense that it can expand people's horizons. And by putting Shakespeare in our case, Shakespeare predominantly, in non-theatre venues, it really kind of, gives you that elbow room to explore and look at these plays and themes and so on, and the venues in a completely different way.
Yeah. I noticed you described your type of theatre. It's site-specific is one of those terms that's bandied about, often not entirely correctly, but you say site-responsive, which is interesting. So you're not creating something for the venue, but you're adapting to it, I assume. Is that what
exactly that, responding to the venue. So, and I think that then gives you, again, it's about embracing the space, it's about embracing the play, and it's about embracing the community. And what it allows you to do, I think, is to be able to have a broader creative output and way of viewing that space and that play. To be site specific is, for want of a better word, very specific.
Yes.
And that doesn't allow you that scope of being truly creative. For example, when we did Alice in Wonderland in 2015, we had this big dream of Alice, of the audiences essentially being Alice and going on an adventure, falling down the rabbit hole and going on this adventure. And for a long time, we sort of got stuck in a loop of trying to find empty warehouses, sort of a bit Punch Drunk style, and creating an installation. But actually what we ended up doing, I think, was much more interesting and much more, again, community led, in that there's a church in Guildford in which Lewis Carroll preached. So rather than starting with Alice under a tree falling asleep, we had Lewis Carroll, the vicar, in the pulpit with the audience as the congregation, and Alice within that congregation, which he then falls asleep during the church service. And so then we created the rabbit hole, through one of the tunnels in the church. And then we we had every room in Guildford Museum was turned into a part of Wonderland, and all the audience sat around a huge table for the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And then we moved the audience to Guildford Castle, where the King and Queen of Hearts were. So again, there are moments of that are specific, if you like, in terms of a king and queen in a castle, but actually it is more responding to a space around you. And in the same way that when we had found for a long time, we knew about Guildford Model Railway, and we kept thinking, God, it'd be so great for a show. And, we're talking about things like the Railway Children, but wanted to do something that wasn't quite so obvious, perhaps. And eventually, sometimes it takes a while for ideas to, have all of these different ideas floating around, and eventually they come together. And we decided that actually a really exciting play that could be set, railways are community spaces, they're commuter spaces, and actually something that feels a little more urban perhaps is The Merry Wives of Windsor. And there's also that it's all very madcap with different people coming in, and it's quite farcical, which you can then create that sense around the trains, but also create that sense of an urban village or an urban community. So yes, again, it's responding to the space.
And it's that key thing. And I think that's one of the lovely things that are the directors that we have brought in to work with us to direct the shows, who create the visions, who have the vision for the shows that we do alongside Sarah and I, is that they really have bought into and brought their own mark and stamp in very different ways over the years. But all of them have that understanding that, okay, all of this Shakespeare play is largely set indoors in a court, in a whatever. Well, hang on, we've got a massive oak tree and a bandstand. So let's not pretend that we are not under a big oak tree and on a bandstand. So let's make this outdoor area. What could it be, therefore? So that kind of that's slightly expanding the world, and therefore the audience not feeling that they're watching something that should be indoors, but the audience, you have that feeling that, it could only have happened on this night in this way, and Shakespeare wrote it like this 400 years ago. It really gives that sense of, again, one of those things right at the beginning when we did first start the company was about how can we break down some barriers that people have to theatre going, but also to Shakespeare. And by looking at the shows in these ways, it really invites an audience to sort of shake off that feeling of theatre isn't for me, or I'm not going to get this, or I don't belong here. But actually, these are your spaces, and we're going to use them in a really fun and unusual way. But we're not saying you have to watch it like this. Sit here. It's all up there. You're in the dark. We're down there at the other end of the room on a stage in live.
We're all complicit. We're all part of the same world, which is exciting. And also, there are so many things in Shakespeare text that are brought out by the spaces that we use. Hamlet swears by the rood. Well, if you're in a church and you've got this huge gold rood screen that he's in front of, that's really exciting. At the Duke's Oak, we meet for so
many references to nature and moons and stars and sky and fun and stuff, and then it makes the words, it imbues them with another sense of this kind of, the job of an actor is to make it sound like these words are being made up on the spot by these characters. They're not in a script. They're real people. So if you've got those things that are inspiring the speaker to swear by the rood, or to suggest that an oak but with one green leaf on it would have answered her, or lines like that, where do those phrases come up for those people in their minds? Well, probably because they're looking at something. So it does create a real wonderful sense of, like Sarah says, a complicity, an immediacy and a complicity with audience and the words and the actors.
Something else that Shakespeare and most great poets from Britain use as metaphors is the weather, which isn't always kind to outdoor theatre, is it? So how do you cope with that?
We've had some times. There's definitely been, 2012 was the wettest summer in 100 years. So that was really fun to navigate. And I remember there's been numerous times where if you weren't on stage, you were backstage holding the gazebo dressing room down. There were times, I remember Bill Ward played The Tempest for us the first time we did The Tempest. And we turned up one day and he was gathering sticks and we thought, oh, he's very in character. But actually, he just turned and pointed to the dressing room, which basically just looked like a broken spider. It had been whipped by the wind so badly. So then he was gathering sticks that we all used to try and splint the dressing room back together. And then in more recent years, a problem that we never thought we'd have to worry about is the hot weather.
Yes.
We had few 38-degree weathers, which you can always guarantee if it's raining and cold summer, then you're in really skimpy clothes. And if it's a really hot summer, it's an Edwardian theme and you've got layer upon layer upon layer. And, it's just part of the magic.
Yes.
But also what's been great over 18 years, and certainly our loyal audiences, know that. And after 18 years, we do have, quite a core loyal audience. Come rain or shine, we continue. And I think for a long time, our poor box office volunteers, all they kept having was, is it going ahead tonight? Is it happening tonight? Are they going to do it tonight? Are you sure? Well, it's raining here in Woking, or it's like 3:00 in the afternoon. Well, the weather forecast says this. And so you have to kind of have that, that we will continue regardless of the weather, policy. And of course, once health and safety, has to come in, you have to be sensible about it. But our audiences will stay throughout. Well, last summer when we did the Canterbury Tales, it was, we say about holding down the dressing room 10 years ago. We were holding down parts of the set for Canterbury Tales last summer. And we had musical instruments outside behind this big polythene shower curtain, and we had but the audience were under these umbrellas. Almost you couldn't see them at all because all they had were waterproofs everywhere, like that, holding on. And so if they're there, we're there, and it rains on us, it rains on them, and go. But it's you have to just have to go with it, don't you?
Yeah, I have a memory of Macbeth in Heaton Park near Manchester when it was absolutely torrential rain all the way through until the last scene, and the audience moved on, leaving actors dying in the mud as we moved on to the next scene. But it went ahead.
Gosh. Well, you kind of have to, don't you? I think it's been about 5 or 6 in 18 years that we've ended up abandoning. We've always tried to start, and there comes a point, if it becomes dangerous, of course you have to stop, or if it's so torrential that the audience can't hear anyway, then it's a little bit pointless. But most weather it can be navigated.
It's survivable,
well.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly, survivable.
We even survived Flying Ant Day, didn't we? One year, 2018. All of a sudden, it was that moment, when it all happens, Flying Ant Day, and on stage, we could see some of the cast were doing their scene, and up the table leg of the piece of set was just like this black kind of, I don't know, thing moving up the, and then all of a sudden it sort of
the problem was
murmuration.
It was a show with Kate, wasn't it?
A show with Kate, yeah.
Which really didn't help.
So you say you've got a loyal following, which I suppose you will have after 18 years in the same place. But what's the makeup of your audience? Is it the usual sort of middle-class theatre audience, or is it more varied?
I think, but certainly to a degree, of course. We're lucky that we've always attracted younger children because some of it is promenade and some of it is in unusual locations. It does attract a wider demographic, for sure. We work very hard to attract a wider demographic. So, for example, we have Pay What You Can nights. We do those every Monday to ensure, it's not just one performance, to ensure that, and the standard BSL and relaxed performances. But I think because we also have residencies and tour to a lot of the least advantaged schools in our community, we also have a lot of interest from those places as well. So, for example, where we can, we'll either give free tickets or heavily discounted tickets. And that enables us to start creating a less middle class, wealthy audience, so that, yes, they will come on free tickets, but actually it might be that the next time or the next year, if they're no longer at those schools, they've had a nice time, they might come on a Pay What You Can night or bring their family or come on other nights. So it slowly starts to build that theatre going audience, in perhaps a less obvious way.
Yeah. One thing I thought about all these different types of venues that you use, particularly outdoor venues, is the technical issues. It does make it difficult for the actors and for like lighting and sound and all the technical departments. Do you like to talk about that? How you overcome those sorts of problems?
Every show, every venue has some different requirement that is going to, some challenge that you're going to be faced with. More often than not, it's power.
Yeah.
Bringing enough power in, but though nowadays with LED lighting, actually you could do quite a lot of a smaller amount. I think one of the biggest challenges, I think, wherever we are, whether it's in the open air or indoors, it's about, for us, it's the infrastructure that's required for a show, and that's not just for the show itself, the stage, if you like. It's also what the audiences expect nowadays: toilet facilities, bar, and so on. We have to bring everything to these venues and remove it all. So on the one hand, it's about establishing really great relationships with those venues. So you mentioned Romeo and Juliet there in 2010, our first time in Holy Trinity Church. And we've used that space now every winter since that time. But it's about extending, developing a working relationship that we are celebrating that venue, bringing new people to it to engage with that place. And over time, through respecting that venue and respecting the users of it, so in this case, the parishioners, we're able to extend every year something, or we've rebuilt on our use of those venues. I think the most elaborate show we did there was we built a walkway up over the choir stalls. So you had the floor of the church, then the stage, then you had this balcony above the rood screen up near the giant cross up towards the apse. So we completely took over that church space, and they've allowed us to do the Scottish play in there twice, which you might otherwise go, oh, that's, there may have been a sort of, they might have frowned upon that, but actually they were very willing because they'd begun to trust what we were doing. But yes, the lighting and the sound in particular, a lot of that kit is hugely expensive and takes a lot of time to build and a lot of time to get rid of. And it's about being as creative as well, because also at the same time, what you don't want to do is build a set in front of your set, which is your venue. So it's about how can you hide that? And we've got the magicians, and I like to think of the magicians because what they do, they're not magicians in that obvious sense, but the way the sound designers, lighting designers, and so on, how they create. They put speakers inside sheep, or they put, not real sheep, but, or how they light something which you think is natural lighting, but actually stage lighting that's been brought in. Yeah. It's a huge operation. And I think sometimes I kind of want to go, well, we need to tell more people about the amount of work that goes on to make that happen. But then at the same time, it's the magic of not knowing how it happened. So it's finding that balance, isn't it, between the two?
Yeah. And you have to cope with, particularly the sound. You have the acoustics of a church can be quite difficult to cope with. But then the acoustics of outdoors are a different ball game as well, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And each space is completely different. We're really lucky. Our freelance but regular sound designer, Matt Eaton, is an absolute sound genius. I mean, he's not only just brilliant musically and composes stuff and just has this whole, sometimes he's done what feels like filmic soundscapes that last throughout the whole show. He's an absolute genius, but he understands balancing sound so well and making sure that in an echoey church or a vast park, he understands exactly how to get the actors' voices to every single person in that audience, and that's an extraordinary skill, And with float mic, absolutely. And sometimes that some of them outside, they look like these little hedgehogs on the floor that you're frantically wrapping up in plastic to keep them dry, and so he's got all of that to balance up as well. And if they're in the wrong place, then you've got too heavy a footfall. Or 1 year we had to create some sort of chili and garlic paste to put off the rats from gnawing through the foxes, to put all the foxes off from gnawing through all his cables. So
and then on top of that, it's about audiences. How do you get the audience to a jumbo jet in the middle of an airfield in the middle of December, and then not allowed? They've got to drive on a very specific route to get to the aircraft in the dark, a venue which isn't lit, and we got to park them, get them on board the aircraft. And that was I mean, that if that was anything like a military operation, if that's the the metaphor, I mean, it's incredible. But therefore the logistics of looking at those venues and where will the audience go? Where are the escape routes? Where's the health and safety, the access, ensuring that these venues are accessible, because some of these venues were not built for theatre. They weren't built. They were built 400 years ago. So they don't necessarily have the access points that audiences expect. So that's another thing that we have to consider bringing in, is whether that's ramps, or whether that is other points of being able to create accessibility for those venues. So big.
You must have brought through, you've got some actors who've been with you for a long time who are used to your way of working, but you must have brought through a few young actors who weren't quite as experienced in playing these sorts of venues. So how do you get them used to it?
That's such a good question. I think sometimes that's about the skill of the director. It's also about having, a good vocal coach on board, for example. It's about the team. I also think for us, it's really important. Like you said, there's some actors that have been with us for years. And I think it's about balancing the team. I think having a really strong mix of people that have worked with you before and new people it's a great combination, because we all learn from each other all the time, don't we? And you never stop learning. And I can remember from my early days, looking up to certain actors. And I think if you can create that perfect balance of actors who have done it before, actors who can go, oh, yes, the wind is a nightmare, for rustling trees, or make sure you're facing this direction when the wind, all of that stuff. But also having the ability to nurture new talent, so that one day they are then the people giving the advice and helping people along. I think that's all part of our glorious industry anyway, whether you're in unusual spaces or not.
The other thing it's sort of unusual nowadays that Sarah and I are in that old-fashioned sense of actor managers. So whereas you might have the producers who have decided to put you in this cold and drafty church in February, whilst they're, down the pub, or they're not there tonight, your bosses are, if you like, are sat doing exactly the same show as you in the cold and drafty church, or they're stood in the no. But they're stood in the rain on stage, getting absolutely soaking wet. So, not saying that therefore we do it, but that actor manager sense actually puts the manager in the same room as the cast and the rest of the stage management team. So from our point of view, I find it a real joy, a privilege to work with those people, but hear them be able to share the space and work it together. Because then when we come away when we're going to do it next year, we've also got a working knowledge of what everybody experienced before and
how it can be improved.
Yeah.
And it also gives you the opportunity to hear the issues on the ground, and importantly, whether it's the stage management team or the creative team or the actors, to experience what they're having to do to be able to overcome an issue. That there will always be something with a site responsive venue. So if you're there on the ground to experience it, you can actually go, yes, I understand what the problem is here. Let's try and counteract that, rather than you say being quite far removed and just going, just tell them to jump over that, or, whatever it might be, or tell them to wear a vest, or I don't know.
It's a term that you very rarely hear, though, these days, the actor manager. It's interesting that you've adopted that. I think recent years, the only other person I can think of who might fall into that is maybe Barry Rutter when he was in Northern Broadsides, because he was acting and he was artistic director. Yeah. But you're happy with that title?
Yeah, we are. And actually, it's not as rare as we think it is. The Globe have used that model for a long time. Michelle Terry and Mark Rylance and Kenneth Branagh. Yeah.
But I think, I think when you say actor manager generally to the public or stuff, people aren't quite sure what does that mean. They know what a director is, and they kind of have an idea what a producer is.
Does anyone know what a producer is?
It sounds posh. So if you sort of, I don't know, I kind of split between actor manager, co-founder, producer, depending on who I'm talking to at the time, I think.
Yeah. All of these issues that you have to overcome, though, as much fun as they may be, they make it, I would imagine, quite an expensive way of creating theatre.
Yes, and I think that's what a lot of audience members in particular don't really appreciate, is that I think often they go, well, you're in a park, why isn't it free? Or why is it costing £28.50 a ticket? And you're like, because we've got to bring everything in, the whole infrastructure has got to be brought in. And it's also about the venue liaison and the work that's involved. The amount of work in advance of a site responsive show is huge, because it's about creating those relationships. It's about understanding the space. It's about working out how much of that space you bring in. And inevitably, there will always be something that someone hasn't told you about, something like, oh no, that plug socket's never worked. What? Whatever it might be, or, working out where the loos are or where they can go, or, boring things like bin collections and it's all of that stuff. And I think, as well as, like we say, bringing in the sound, bringing in the lighting, bringing in the stage, bringing in the chairs, bringing in the dressing rooms, working out if there is no lockable space. So what does happen to everything overnight? How do you bring in that lockable space? So there is an enormous amount, and it's we're currently working on our summer 18th birthday production. Is a huge production of Romeo and Juliet, which we're starting. It's mainly taking place on Guildford High Street, and it starts on Guildford High Street, which has involved road closures and no parking signs. And we've got 7 different venues that we're going to. We've got Holy Trinity Church steps, we've got Abbott's Hospital, we've got the Guildhall balcony, we've got Tunsgate Arch, we've got Tunsgate Quarter, which is a shopping centre, we've got the Castle Grounds. And so all of those venues need liaising with, which is a lot of work, as well as obviously road closures. But we've also got an adult community chorus who are all going to be part of the Capulet Ball. And we're working with 4 schools plus one of our Saturday clubs to have students all involved in the opening scene as well. So the logistics of organising these things, chaperones, where you're storing professional actors, where they're getting changed, when you've got multi-locations, where are the quick changes happening, because actually we're on the high street, all of that stuff, it's vast.
And it's not just for one night.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. It's not, a lot.
I wish this one.
Yeah. Quite often, you can make extraordinary things happen if it's only for 2 nights or 3 nights. But going back to the financial aspect of it, we don't receive any core funding from the Arts Council or local financial funding. So the vast majority of the budgets, which usually range anywhere, usually from about 100,000 to this is about 150,000, isn't it? Yeah. Has to be met through ticket sales. So that means you've got to run for long enough to recoup that money, which means so Romeo and Juliet, for example, is running for 3 weeks. So that's 4 weekends, you get 4 Fridays and Saturdays out of it. But so you're not just asking this place to not open for one night. You're asking them not to open for 3 weeks.
Yeah. Or to open, but
20 minutes.
We're then squeezing in, yeah.
So you need that. So in order that, again, that ticket price comes down to, well, we've only got 23 performances. So we've got to get 160 people every night through the door. And the biggest seller, as we know, after 18 years, is word of mouth. So because these events that we do are special, you can't convey what it's going to be like to do a show on a Boeing 747 on the back of a flyer. You can't convey what it will be like to do The Wind in the Willows with a real motor car in the woods at Watts Gallery or whatever. It's about people coming to see the show and going, oh, you've got to go and see this. It was brilliant. But that word of mouth takes time to travel. And so that length of run is so important to be able to allow that to happen. But it is a very, very delicate balance because you could end up with doing 21 performances, but only 50% of them have decent size audiences, but you've got to put yourself out there in order for the hope to bring it back, because the success of, that's just to break even. That's just to pay everybody, which is all, standard industry rates, and the production side of everything as well, toilets, et cetera, and our full-time staff. Yeah. So it's a theatre. Who goes into this? It's a really delicate balance. I think any producer or actor manager will say, the same. And probably, even if you're at the top of the tree, there's still that sort of same balance with expectation and things. I would imagine things might be a little easier with funding, but
and we must say it's important to say that we have had project-related funding from the Arts Council for Romeo and Juliet.
Yes. But it's ad hoc, so you can never guarantee it. So
it's been a long time since we've had funding, for sure.
Turning to Romeo and Juliet, then you mentioned you're closing off Guildford High Street for 3 weeks every evening. You've mentioned some of the venues or some of the areas that you use in the balconies. Probably obvious to most people, but how are you using those other places on the high street?
No, the play is fascinating. And until we started this project back last summer, started to consider it, you don't realise how a play of two halves it is. And I know a lot of people talk about it being, it's a comedy. It could be a comedy the first half if you took out the prologue, and you don't know what's going to happen. You've never heard of it before. You've never seen it. You know nothing about it. You could be forgiven for thinking you are heading towards a happy marriage, and which is what happens in Midsummer Night's Dream. It starts in a very great similarity between the two. But also, the play also is in two halves, and says the first half is very public, up until the point where Mercutio is killed, not giving any spoilers away, and Romeo is banished. Everything happens largely in the streets, in town squares, at a ball. The second half, after that point, becomes very much more of a chamber piece, and you're in only 2 or 3 locations inside 1 or 2 houses and a tomb. So when we had this idea of what could we do for our 18th birthday that was an event, that was something special, that could celebrate our community, Romeo and Juliet suddenly sprang to mind because it has these very real locations. And so why not make the streets of Guildford the streets of Verona? We're not pretending that we are in Italy. We're not pretending that we're in, I don't know, in the 1950s or the 1920s or whatever. It is it's summer 2024, because you don't need any. I mean, the set design is actually for these sections is largely minimal because these are the real venues. So you're not trying to hide the fact of where you are. So the opening, as Sarah said, starts on Holy Trinity steps. This is sort of that sort of town square feel. And then you go into Abbott's Hospital, which will become the Capulets' house. It's like a 400-year-old almshouse. That's the Capulets' home. And then you go to Tunsgate's Arch, which is this lovely sort of Doric columned portico, which is where you meet Romeo and Benvolio and Mercutio on the way to the ball. You go into Tungate Quarter, which is a very stylish shopping centre nearby, which the Capulets have hired for their ball. So you're in this shopping centre. So there's Gales and there's the White Company and all of that. They're not trying to hide any of that around. And then of course you come to the Guildhall, back to the Guildhall, which has got this wonderful historic balcony, which of course is Juliet's balcony. So you'll be in the square, in the street with Romeo on the cobbles, or sets, we should say they're sets, not cobbles, on the street. And then we've got a new art cafe who are on new to Guildford. So they're going to be a location for one of the scenes. And then by the time we get to the second half, we're in the castle gardens and we'll build a set in our more traditional way. But the one thing that I hope, what Shakespeare's written is a really fast play, actually.
2 hours traffic.
Yes, yeah, it's incredibly quick. And it's quick also because the characters, not only Romeo and Juliet, but so many of them are impetuous. Capulet, Lady Capulet, the Mercy, the Friar, Mercutio, Tybalt, they all have an urgency about getting on and doing what they want to do. And so hopefully by moving the audience between these venues, the audience will walk about 1,500 meters in total, which doesn't sound very far, but over the course of that first half, hopefully what audiences will get that sense of how time and how the scene and how the play, the story is moving at quite a lick, and decisions are made. You know, we all know that they fall in love at first sight. You know, and they within an hour, Julieta said, you know, if you mean what you say, will you marry me tomorrow morning? And next morning they were getting married.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but we buy into it. So why do we buy into it that quickly? We don't really question it because we're caught up in it. Mm-hmm. So I think if we can physically get caught up in that story as well, I'm hoping that the show will surprise audiences who know Romeo and Juliet really well, but they might not have seen. You know, sadly, we still can't include the scenes with the musicians and the scenes with with poor Pot Pan and his kitchen staff. But yeah, I hope it's going to be a really exciting show, I think, for people.
I was about a month ago, I was talking to Owen Horsley about his 12th night in Regent's Park, and he was speaking at length about his love for Shakespeare and how he acquired it. So where did Shakespeare come into your lives?
For me, at an early age, I had a wonderful... When I was young, I was very lucky that my parents sent me to lots of drama classes because it's all I wanted to do. And my out-of-school drama teacher, Mrs. Barnes, who even then was quite an elderly lady, but she was extraordinary. And she introduced me to Shakespeare speeches. And I remember her saying to me once, Sarah, if you can't get on board with Shakespeare, you will never be an actor. So I was like, oh, God, I better be good at Shakespeare. But she introduced me to so many extraordinary women in Shakespeare, so many extraordinary speeches that were so inspiring, these strong women, you know, fighting against their situation or finding their voice or finding their way out of situations, these clever women that he has created. And, you know, I'm just trying to think how old I was when she probably started me on Shakespeare, you know, maybe 10 or 11 or 12 or something. And I was just in awe of it all, really. And the way their self-expression, you know, the way he can describe emotions and feelings and thoughts in such a unique clarity that it instantly makes you go, I know exactly what that feeling is. And there's no way I might have gone off a little bit sad. You know, and he comes up with something so compelling. Yeah, that was me.
For me, I wasn't, you know, my mum and dad didn't have the opportunity. We didn't go to the theatre. But at school, at secondary school, my English teacher, Mr. Burford, we were doing Taming of the Shrew. And he taught it in a way that we didn't dry read it around the room. He encouraged us to get up and act it out. And and I'm an only child. So I think that sense of play acting, playing out your own adventures and making stuff up, you know, is probably part and parcel of how I grew up, you know, on my own from that point of view. But then he took us to Stratford. I grew up in Worcester. So Stratford's only, you know, 30 miles from Worcester. So we went there to watch Taming of the Shrew. And I have to say, it was one of the most boring experiences. And there is a good thing about this in this moment, hopefully, I thought, yeah, it just didn't speak to me at all, this play. I felt like it was down there at the end of that room. I was sat in the darkness and I couldn't connect with it. And then about 3 years later, I was at sixth form and I went back to Stratford in my little mini metro and I saw Taming the Shrew again. And it blew my mind. And I thought, how is the same play with the same words and the same characters and everything, how is this so different? Now, okay, maybe I was 3 years older, but I don't think it was that. It was the fact that it was colourful, it was alive, it was, and I can probably name you most of the cast, the director, I luckily met the designer of it a few years later on another show I had an opportunity to do, but everything about it was alive and different. And I thought, God, this is exciting. This is Shakespeare. But 3 years ago, I was thinking it was incredibly boring, this play. But now this play, so what is that? And from that moment on, I became fascinated about how Shakespeare works and how Shakespeare can be interpreted. At Bretton Hall, we didn't do it. We never did Shakespeare. 3 years of training. I didn't do any Shakespeare. So I learned it all on the job. And that was one of the other things about setting the company up was, you know, Shakespeare, as we were saying earlier, Shakespeare's can be expensive to stage. They're big casts quite often. And as a result, Shakespeare's aren't they're not done widely. So therefore, as an actor, to be cast in a Shakespeare play is actually I was finding quite difficult for me as an actor 18 years ago. I had no Shakespeare on my CV. And so that was one of the things that kind of spurred me on. Well, I love this stuff, but I want to do some of it. How am I going to do it? So thankfully, Sarah suggested that I start this company.
And you said for a year. Nice little credit for your CV.
So something about Shakespeare has kept you coming back to him.
Yeah, definitely. And every time you play one of his characters, I fall in love with them each time because it doesn't matter who they are. They're so fully drawn, they're so fully created and rounded.
Whilst at the same time having enough scope for you to be able to create something.
But that's because they are so fully rounded, I think. They're not prescriptive, but they're deep, they're 3D, so that you can bring a whole real life human being alive.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that those female characters that you were talking about that are so rounded were originally played by young boys who must have been extraordinary actors, really, to pull that off.
Yeah, they must have been. Yeah. Wouldn't it be amazing to go back in time and watch one of those plays?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that having this company has afforded me, I love history. And so I've been able to look, we've done talks and I've done walks on Shakespeare and all sorts of things over these 18 years. But one of those things has been being able to sort of do some research and look at who these original actors were and how they worked 400 years ago, and the amount of plays that they would have in their heads. And because you didn't know what play necessarily was going to be performed tomorrow afternoon. It was only when they announced it that afternoon. Oh God, I'm playing Hamlet tomorrow. Right. Get that out, so that capacity, not only for memory, but to be able to play those roles and Shakespeare know these actors so well that he could write for them in such a way that wrote to their skill base and to show them off in the best way. It's just phenomenal. So when people think, oh, it's dry, it's dusty, it's old, it's, or rogues and vagabonds, these actors, I think Hamlet talks about them. I can't remember the line off the top of my head, but they are the brief chronicles of our times. They are the essence of our citizenship. That's not the quote, but they were incredible people, and they must have had that kind of star celebrity element about them that I guess movie stars and so on do have today.
Yeah, I'm sure Richard Burbage would have come up with a line just like that, and the full line, straight off the top of his head. So
exactly, on that name.
So what haven't you done? Is there anything that you would really love to do out of the canon that you haven't done yet?
Oh, there's a couple, isn't there? I mean, it's funny enough, we're talking about programming in the year after.
But sometimes the ones that you haven't done are hard to sell.
Yeah.
So I think there's something in that.
Pericles is one that we would love to do.
Yeah.
Again, it's not a name that is going to, unless we can find a way of doing it.
And we haven't done Titus Andronicus, which could be, a really great horror, couldn't it? In the right place, in the right hands. But
and the history plays,
We've
done the two Richards, and we've done
Julius Caesar, Henry V.
Yeah, they're wonderful plays. They're wonderful, wonderful plays. But they were you need a long time for those to run as well. There needs to be a concept around play. You can't do them just on their own, one play on their own, because they do need to have that sequential element to them. Goodness, who knows? Don't know. Maybe there'll be one that they haven't found yet and get discovered.
Well, they have been looking, but there are one or two names, aren't there, of plays that is supposedly written that we haven't found yet. You must have had lots of great actors come through the doors, but you had a few famous offspring as well. You've had like Rosalind Blessed, Brian Blessed's daughter, has been with you for a few years.
Yeah, we've had Ros is one of our regulars, and Brian's worked for us as well.
He has, yeah, and Sandy Toxvig's son Theo as well. He's working for you.
Theo's worked for us in a number of different ways as an actor, but also he writes for our young company, which is amazing. He's an incredible writer.
Yeah. So you're attracting actors. You've got famous enough to be attracting great actors rather than having to go out and find them, are you now?
I mean, I think so. Freddie Fox played Hamlet for us and was an extraordinary Hamlet. He really was. And I think
his dad was his dad.
His dad was his dad as the recording of the voice of the ghost. I think it's about, I think our kind of work attracts actors who love their work and who love theatre and who care about good theatre, because I think there's slightly unusual experiences for an actor sometimes, for all the reasons that we've talked about. But because we also create a really strong world and a really strong vision, if you're an actor who's really invested in really good storytelling and really wants to play that character, then I think it can be something really quite special.
So it's 18 years it's been. You didn't see it lasting for 18 years when you started.
Yeah.
But now you're in a position where you do have to look forward. So where does it go from here? Is it more of the same, or what's up with the next 18 years? Well,
I think it's about constantly evolving and changing as your community changes. And a lot of that is in terms of the outreach, looking for where those holes are, essentially looking for where those voids are in our community and helping to make the community a better space for absolutely everybody and not just your traditional theatre goers. We've slowly started building our touring side. So we're looking at doing more of that. We've started to go abroad as well with our stuff. So it's about slowly developing that side and seeing where it takes us, I think, seeing what's interesting.
And after 18 years, that partnerships as well, developing partnerships with other theatres and other theatre producers and things because a lot, like I say, it lasts for 3 weeks and then it's gone. It's into the ether. Yeah. So the amount of work that goes into these shows, to be able to give them another life elsewhere is certainly something which would be really, really, really lovely to be able to explore further.
Yeah.
And what else have you got in your 18th birthday season, apart from Romeo and Juliet?
Our final show of the year it's just been named, actually. We're doing The House Trap. And we're doing that at West Horsley Place, which is the house that Ghosts filmed in, actually. And we're writing a murder mystery, especially for that, an interactive murder mystery where the audience will interview suspects and see scenes play out in different rooms of the house. So we're really excited for that.
That was Matt Pinches and Sarah Gobran of Guildford Shakespeare Company. Romeo and Juliet will take place in Guildford Castle Grounds and the town centre from Friday the 21st of June to Saturday the 13th of July 2024. For more information and tickets, see www.guildford-shakespeare-company.co.uk.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.